Hello everyone, and good existence to you. This is the Quiet Palace Podcast, where great legends prevail and evil wanes to dust. Hopefully. I am your host, Fett, and today in these infinite halls I kick my feet up in that I've come to liberty in coining the Quiet Palace, we will be carefully considering the value of one-shots and short adventures for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Though the context of longer campaigns will be an honorable mention, considering today's topic, we will briefly compare the two when all is said and done as to how these installations can be handled differently, while the general experience of playing Dungeons & Dragons remains undisturbed. For those unfamiliar, a one-shot is a one-session long adventure. As a beginner, you may be familiar with this concept, as your DM may have ran one of these for newer players to get a feel for the game. Since you do not need to run a one-shot or shorter adventure to understand the fundamentals, however, many new players have begun whole campaigns from the very start or even in the journey's midst. When I first started playing D&D, I started in the middle of a long-term campaign that went on for about a year or so. During that time, hearing about one-shots and the like, I had a couple of key questions in the back of my mind. If there's little to no character progression, like level-ups or experience, will it be as rewarding as a campaign? And what changes in pace or even game mechanics may be in place for a single adventure or a handful of them? Though, more common inquiries might lean more towards the level of seriousness of the setting, or whether or not there is as much freedom of action that a full-flush campaign might entail. As both a DM and a player, experimenting with shorter jaunts on the table has been as rewarding as long-term games for a few good reasons. Being able to progress the story from a different angle has brought a unique perspective to the campaign as a whole. When a party member for a campaign is sick and everyone else is still down to play, a one-shot can be a useful way to further a more distant narrative that isn't the campaign's focus. Besides, telling the missing player about a similar adventure you had over what they missed in the last session has been a spectacular alternative. Nobody feels left out and the people playing don't have to acclimate to a setting potentially alien to what they're prepared to play that day, save for scrambling to create a character quickly, unless you're like me and you have 36 different characters you've made. For anticipation of such an event or a fallen character. There's still a lot I haven't tried. Can you blame me? Aside from staying within contextual lines, you'll be able to chase a niche setting, or even differentiate entirely from traditional starting points, pursuing a course of events in the heat of an adventure as opposed to a slow-paced introduction. For those that just aren't into starting off at level 1 with quick turns and small numbers, this can prove to keep things interesting with hardcore and novice players alike. Considering the expansion of options one has when they create a character at 5th or even 10th level, and the variety of challenges the DMs can unleash on their players, I find it difficult to stray away from at least taking the opportunity to try a different class or run a certain monster in either position. Being able to kit your players out in fancy doodads they might not otherwise have, or give them an influence of some kind that could be a not-so-subtle death sentence for a long-term adventure, can lead to some intriguing course of events. Anything from powerful artifacts, an incredible motive power invested into the party via an unshakable universal power, or even the strong political rapport regarding your party's image that could help you in ways that only the most devoted individuals to the cause might attain over the course of a longer campaign. These concepts and more can prove to be a learning experience, or even just flat-out fun in a way that the players might not normally experience. One-shots can vary in settings similarly to campaigns, but what the DM may decide to do with that can range a little more dramatically. Though they can be as serious, there need not be a lack of detail or issues that may cause a rise to action. Freedom of action is a powerful tool of exploration I see as a necessary freedom to players. And though not all players care to fully engage with it, even in one-shots or shorter adventures, small details of how that character might do something different or unconventional can greatly influence certain variables along a short journey. Although, a one-shot can lack a large structure of lore and background events, and for those that wish to enjoy a more beer and pretzels playstyle, smaller details can improve the flow of the game so that players don't feel jam-packed into the world and the aspects that have little to do with most of the immediate subjects at hand. It's okay to want to march outwards with your team of vampire hunters without knowing their life stories and the history of the planet itself. Such things do take up a considerable amount of time when they arrive at the forefront. And for one-shots or time crunches, this can slow things down in a particularly critical manner. To some, a one-shot is a nice way to disengage from a very serious long-term campaign and embrace Dungeons & Dragons in a more casual fashion. To others, it can be a way to test out certain ideas or to sharpen their knowledge of different classes or game mechanics. From your own perspective, or from the aspects we'll discuss today, or that we've already discussed perhaps, one-shots and short adventures can be cherished and appreciated as some of the greatest memories your friends share at the table. The opportunity to test certain things out can be a rarity, but with a healthy dose of one-shots to the mix, dungeon masters and players can spend one session trying out a new concept or an aspect of the game they might not have done much with, and have a solid opportunity to test the waters of something new without the possibility that they're locked into an unfavorable choice for weeks or months on end. Not to say that every single one must be fraught with homebrews and tester content, but experimenting every now and again can produce some interesting results without posing a risk to a whole module's worth of content or the party themselves. Using one-shots to introduce new players to the game at large is an excellent strategy. Starting off at low levels, or even level 1, with a short introduction and a goal or quest which will act as the party's focus allows the players to engage with the world seamlessly. Keeping the grand lore on a need-to-know basis and giving them all the essentials to explore the world around them will put less strain on any time frames and leave lots of room for gameplay. Not to mention new players that might be overwhelmed with the grand plot right off the hop will have an easier time when the secondary knowledge is on the back burner. Being able to focus on the rules and the character's capabilities can prove to be a more welcoming experience to the players as well. I ultimately find this method to put less pressure on a good deal of beginners, though some folks just love a good story. Should everyone at the table be all about the lore, it's totally reasonable to go nuts on that detail. The aforementioned can make the journey to role-playing, combat scenarios, and exploration quicker, though guiding a party along with a complex storyline is great introductory material as well. They might not be fighting and learning how their abilities and skill checks work as much, but they're acclimating to the content that binds everything in Dungeons & Dragons together, and maybe putting a buffer on how often the rules come up, preventing a clog of information that has folks running through all the books, DM included. That is equally important, though not necessary to learn the game itself, serving as a powerful element that drives the party to one cause or another. An introductory one-shot can help develop a player's knowledge of the game. As they make more and more characters to play after that, they begin to learn their way around classes that interest them, helping them expand their horizons early and learn their preferred playstyle. For those that enjoy improv, DMs familiarize themselves with the different themes and supplements for their own imagination, giving them experience in a wide variety of possible settings. All in all, one-shots can prove to be an adept environment for beginners that can help everyone expand their knowledge of the game quickly and from many different perspectives. Newcomers aside, there's a good deal to be said for a veteran's approach. Power gamers, role-players, rules lawyers, and shenanigan-bound individuals alike find a lot of reasons to enjoy one-shots. A challenge that puts the minds of these veterans together to take down an incredibly powerful being can be rewarding on its own. Bringing old player characters to the forefront of an adventure can be an interesting way of stories progressing long after they've been told. Perhaps the opportunity to act out a complex character might bear fruit in dramatic advancements between adventures. Since there are many different kinds of players that vary greatly on preference, those that just don't have the interest or time to commit in a year-long campaign or longer might find solace in just dashing into dungeons when scheduling allows. Though the desire for continuation can be strong sometimes, who's to say that a character can't jump from one obscure task to another? Should people desire to bring a character back for yet another one-shot, I believe that it should be encouraged to do so if the setting allows. For the veterans that pour their hearts into their characters, I can only deem that as fair. But to those who desire to see new and different ideas, I would suggest allowing some folks to bring back an old character for the sake of sentimental value, as long as that character or player is not a negative influence at the table. I would assume that, being folks that talk with their DM, negativity is not something I like to see at the table, but we all losers see the downside of certain actions here and there, and we should not be attempting to create an environment where sabotage or a huge backfire for everyone involved is constantly over the horizon. To lighten things back up, let's talk about short adventures. We've covered reasonable ground on the value of a single session's worth of content. What about a smaller journey, whose length could be from a few sessions to a dozen? What differences can be found in something 3 to 10 sessions long as opposed to just one session, or say, Curse's Strahd? Something along the lines of Lost Mines of Phandelver, or even Strixhaven, a Curriculum of Chaos, have different approaches for their concepts as short adventures. Strixhaven being the highlights of a select group of students attending the university. Phandelver being, quite frankly, from what I understand, a whole journey from beginning to end without interruptions. Well, at least a goal or a task that is to be completed that is most certainly more than one session long. But the idea of partitioning a longer amount of time into more important details of the story opens up for a unique method of storytelling. We are not stuck into a constant need to keep pushing on to progress. We are given opportunities in various different situations based on the character's engagements, prior dealings, and aspirations. In consideration of Strixhaven, we get an idea of how punctual and attentive PCs plan on being, how much they study, how good they are at it, and what elements of the university at large affect the group. Yet, despite how different the studies of each PC could be, there's always some driving force that has them band together and prevent chaos from running rampant. Short adventures mean a smaller commitment to a schedule, and can allow for different openings, possibly preventing days from getting mixed around over the years. The level range tends to be a bit lower than a campaign when starting at earlier levels. At the end of the day, as fun as high-level builds can be, it's a lot to manage. Sometimes a cutoff at level 10 or even lower is enough to tell a story without making the game too drawn out for the preference of some players. All the power to you if things ramp up a bit. Good luck with that rock shot, sir. Short adventures include a great amount of detail without the drawback of quite a lengthy schedule, yet provide a good deal of room for lore and detail that a one-shot would lack. When a DM is considering the span of content for a group, a short adventure can be a reasonable alternative where both content and length are moderate, though the happenings therein might be a little more fixed in a longer campaign where you may have more time to turn the tides for certain instances. Time skips can be useful to allow for longer engagements to still fit within the story without the necessary continuation of set events after session. There are, of course, ways to compress a detour, but in all honesty, using that en lieu of just narrating the events as they occur can make players feel like the aspirations are just brushed off. Communication is key to make sure that if long-term plans come up, the DM and the players will know what they want to do and how things might turn out. Sometimes slaying the dragon that destroyed your village just won't be happening in the story the DM is telling. A player's backstory can be a useful tool when they end up in places where it's relevant, but one angle of the story or another could flip things around and add sessions to a game that weren't accounted for. It's one of those things. If there's time for it and everyone's on board, it's another piece to the journey. If not, maybe such things can wait for the next adventure. Perhaps that one piece of inspiration that player or DM needed to carry on with the next game can be found as they wander through unfamiliar territory. So I don't know where you stand on short adventures, long adventures, and one-shots, and personally I see the value in all of them. I know that they have their uses in different aspects and that people like to maybe do something a little shorter. Maybe you change it up a reasonable amount here and there, and have different settings, not be stuck on the same thing for years on end. But at the same time, a lot of people like to sit down and, continue a story for years and years on end until some conclusion is met, with the end just being, who knows, probably a very emotional battle with a very powerful big bad evil guy, and at the end, with a conclusion, with a bang, that story can end in an interesting fashion. And I mean, that can go for any adventure. You can really do that with anything. The amount of direty in the situation that you're in is more than enough to fuel something that's a lot more, meaningful than what perhaps the building blocks of the campaign may have provided you, alongside other things, supplements, what have you. But I think it's important to consider what people are willing to do as well. And the consideration that I have for most folks is that not everyone has time for a long campaign. Not everybody's going to have every single Tuesday in a row off from work or prior engagements just to sit down for that 3 to 5 or who knows how many hours that you plan on, running each session for. It's quite a lot when you think about it. And I've been playing 2 long-term campaigns for a moment. We've been playing Curse of Strahd, as it happens to be, probably since October of last year, and we've been playing another long-term adventure for the past couple of years since I had lived in a completely different place. So it's been an interesting perspective, playing in longer adventures, shorter adventures, one of which happened to last longer in an essence of we played 2 short adventures in a row, and we're currently kind of in the middle of the second one, but the first one went to about level 10. And so those characters have their place within the lore now, and we're continuing on with the perspective of different folks that have a different drive, that have different aspirations than before. It just kind of adds something new to the campaign. I like what my DM is doing with that personally, and in this case it's a homebrew situation, so we're not going off of a module. This is just kind of, we're going over here, we're doing this, and then we do that until we reach level 10, and, a final battle ensues, and, we find out how that truly ended, perhaps from a different perspective through something that occurs in the future after the events of that specific campaign. So I don't know, you can add a lot of depth with short adventures, making things just get thicker and thicker until maybe a conclusion is made, and maybe party members change over time. So not everyone feels the exact impact that someone would feel if they were playing from the very beginning, if they were playing through each and every short adventure you've thrown in front of them, but at the same time, say, just going through a longer campaign and having one character and developing that person over a large course of time can be very rewarding, and quite frankly can travel to places you would have never thought possible. Like my halfling bard, for example, who recently, as a matter of fact, abandoned the party for the reason of we were journeying, spoilers for Curse of Strahd, by the way, just so you know, we were journeying through Solenka Pass and got to the temple. And I had made a deal with an entity known as Xantras before I had gotten to this temple, and we had made a deal. I advanced in some warlock levels, and I made a deal with Xantras to break him out of the mountain, where he was kept. And in this case, I felt drawn to do so. Not because I saw this thing as a resource of power, but because I was under the delusion, or illusion of sorts, that he was a friend. Not just, somebody who I was a means to an end to. Somebody who was being turned into, a puppet of sorts. And in this case, I was acting on his behalf for certain things, and because of the effects that were given to me from the dark gifts that I accepted from Xantras, turned into some interesting interactions. I've charmed certain party members, I've influenced people to do things they would have otherwise done uncontested, and recently I had the party almost kill themselves trying to get me out of a situation where I went off with another member of the party who was an NPC, respectively, there to further his own ends as well, journeying to this temple. He was there to accept a different gift, and I was there to talk to Xantras and break him out. My party didn't want this. We had talked to individuals before who, after learning about that name, had done some divining for us and found that he was an evil entity. So they were not willing to help me break him out of this temple, and were skeptical of it from the very beginning. So it just kind of developed into this, I used to be a very nice halfling bard who cared about everybody and, generally just wanted the best for all. And turns into, at the end, a mistrusting, suspecting, paranoid, aspiring tyrant who wanted to steal Barovia from out of Strahd's clutches, just for the purposes of, ruling over this place, ushering a golden age, and to march on the other kingdoms and take them for himself, as Xantras promised him to make him a king if he completed perhaps that and a different task that he was asked of on behalf of Xantras. But in this case, I won't be expanding too much farther into that. Just to give you an example, of course. So the benefit of long adventures, I would have to say, there's so much more development. There's so much more interaction with the world and the lore, and there's so much more opportunity for different combats and different monsters that you can experience over time. Because the more levels you gain, the more access to maybe even magical items or certain resources that help you out a lot. There's just more that you can do, more that you can uncover that might otherwise just, maybe not be there, or just maybe not be as challenging, quite frankly. So there's a lot to gain from a campaign as it stands, and there's a lot to gain from short adventures and one-shots in the aspect that they can focus on different aspects. They have a shorter amount of time, and there are certain things that you're going to want to maybe not focus on, or possibly avoid entirely when it comes to, telling the story. And, I would hope that it would not take away from the story's quality. When doing so, it's just a matter of certain things that maybe aren't important in this instance, are not unnecessarily involved with the story so that things carry on way too long. That's just kind of my look at it. But yeah, so aside from that, I think we've summarized everything fairly well. But most importantly than anything, I think it's important always to focus on having fun. being there to play a board game that you enjoy with your friends and introduce people to a game that you love is the goal at the end of the day. I don't play Dungeons & Dragons for competitive nature. I don't do any of that kind of stuff, Adventurers Guild, none of it. I play to enjoy it. I feel like I would know enough to be able to play in such professional environments, but I don't know, it's just not really my style. I like to just kind of sit back and enjoy it. I see it more at the end of the day as a work of art than I do as just a game or something that could even be competitive. Though I do respect those that do that. It's just one of those things. It's something that I'm not terribly interested in. But for those of you that are, it's hard to say where one-shots and short adventures and long adventures really stand. But I would assume that you would maybe want to stick to a one-shot or short adventure. But at the end of the day, for those that maybe want to do higher level things, you could start at higher levels as well. But long campaigns in this case can really be a good way to just tweak your character slowly over time. You're not just kind of figuring out things for that level of character. You start at the basis of level 1 and really focus on every aspect that you are capable of to focus on, making the best character you can for what professional aspects that you have. That being said, of course, we've been here for a moment, and I want to thank you for joining me today on the first episode ever of the Quiet Pals podcast. This is something I thought I'd give a shot, see where it goes. So, if you enjoyed this, make sure you hit the buttons, do the things, be different. Every platform's different, but, stick around if you happen to be interested in having me talk about different aspects of D&D, 5e, 5th edition, for those that don't know. I want to cover content that has to do with new players, experienced players, how to DM, guides on certain aspects of gameplay, really. There's a lot to get into with that. For now, I wish you a wonderful continuation of existence. My name is Fet. Thank you for joining the Quiet Palace podcast, and I hope to talk to you all again very soon. Thank you.